Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Dietrich, Associate Director of Membership, and I'd like to welcome you to the Beauty of Bonsai. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you our presenter, Kevin Bielicki, horticulture specialty grower. Since 2018, Kevin curates our bonsai collection and leads the creation of a Longwood Christmas fern floor display. He holds his MFA from Indiana University / Purdue University in Indiana. Working towards his degree, he has contributed to the maintenance and growth of the Kenneth Collection, a local private bonsai collection, for over 17 years. While caring for this important collection, he has had the opportunity to work with bonsai masters from around the world. Kevin remembers the beauty of an imported crepe myrtle bonsai in full flower. It is the harmony between the structure as well as the pink flowers and the soft exfoliating bark that drew him in, capturing his imagination. Today's recorded presentation and resource guide will be emailed to all attendees. At the end of the presentation, Kevin can answer your questions about bonsai. Please submit them through the chat function. Kevin, thank you so much for being with us today to share your love of bonsai.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you for this opportunity. I think it's really exciting to get to share bonsai with our guests and really just share that love and this art form, which can be very expressive and very special. So just want to thank each of you for joining with us today here at Longwood Gardens, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you all of the unique things happening in the world of bonsai here at Longwood Gardens. I think we're going to start off. I'd like to discuss some of the future aspects to our display and also discuss some of the history, where we've been, what our current collection looks like, as well as where we're going. And then we can take some time to look into the different techniques and how to potentially start a bonsai at home and things to consider and think about when selecting material. So I think we'll dive right into it. So Longwood Reimagined. This photograph here is an image of our new bonsai display area. It's a beautifully rendered Photoshop image. And this photograph is an image looking west from the potting shed, which is our new bonsai workshop. On the left side of the image is where the West Conservatory will be built. So just to give you a frame of reference where that exists in the new space. What I'm really excited about this new area is that we're able to have a much more immersive space where you, our guests, can walk around the bonsai, see them in 360, and experience them from all different angles. We now have seating and benches located in the display, so it's much more of a like a fine art gallery setting where you can sit down, relax, contemplate the artwork, and really enjoy that experience in a new immersive way. So looking back, we had roughly 12 to 14 trees in our former North Passage display. In this new display, we will be able to feature anywhere between 40 to 60 trees at any given time. So it's a massive expanse in our display as a whole. This is a photograph of the potting shed. This will be this entire space will be the new bonsai workshop. So many of you may remember this space was located off the North Passage. This is the area that's really well known for the train tracks that run along the floor. This space will now be accessible to you, our guests. So as myself and other artists from around the world are working on the trees, while we're wiring, pruning, shaping, you will be able to come in and experience that process with us and engage with us and ask any questions. So in the photograph here, we have 3 main areas set up for artists to work. In the far left of the image, we have a beautiful display space for our really prized bonsai containers. It's like a pot wall that becomes like a wall divider. It's going to be a great area for learning and education, where we will have areas to display our tools and other trees in development, as well as host a lot of our classes in the future and as well as our continuing education courses. So this is an image looking from the former North Passage. So you as our guest, when you used to look in, this is what you would see. So you'll now have access to that space. And if you were to walk to the left side of the image, that's where the entrance is to the new bonsai courtyard. Okay, so I think it's really important to touch base a little bit about the history of bonsai here at Longwood and why it's so important and why we're making so many changes and upgrades to our collection today. So just a brief note, bonsai is still fairly young in the United States. It's been here roughly 100 years, originated in China, popularized by Japan a little after. And really, like I said, it's only been here about 100 years or so. And we started our collection because there was a very famous artist by the name of Yuji Yoshimura. He was one of the founding Japanese American bonsai artists who was developing bonsai on the East Coast, and some of his counterparts, like John Naka, were developing it on the West Coast. So he came to Longwood in 1959 and did a demonstration and interactive class with some of our Longwood staff, which you can see in the pictures on the right. And this really inspired Longwood to purchase 13 trees from him. So that same year we purchased 13 trees, and that really kicked off and began our collection. And of those 13 trees, there's 4 of those that remain in our collection today. The images on the right are pictures of our Chinese elm. You can see the stages of development. The top left image represents the tree when it was imported, and then the center image is image close to probably about a year or 2 ago. So pretty current image of what it looks like now. And then the image in leaf is around that same time frame in full leaf. So over the course of time, we've continued to develop and refine the trees into that beautiful aesthetic with that highly ramified, interesting character you see. And the image sequence for this ginkgo is in similar fashion. So you can see in the image of the ginkgo on the top left, it's much less developed, but once we get to that center image, it's a much more uniform, balanced padding and shape throughout. Here are our other 2. One of my favorites, the crepe myrtle on the top left. We've continued to refine the structure and shape. Keep an eye out for this one around July or so. This is usually when it comes into full bloom. Our oldest tree is the one on the right, our Japanese Zelkova. And I think this one is a great example of a broom style where all of the branches originate from one single point and radiate out. This is a very classic style and representation of what trees may actually look like. Okay, so once we started our display, we initially had some pop-up locations throughout the conservatory, but they didn't really meet the needs and demands of a growing collection. So in the early 60s, we started a full bonsai display, which is in a location which is now the children's garden. So the images you're looking at here are where the children's garden is currently located. So we had beautiful display space. As you can see in the image of the bottom right, we had beautiful, simple backdrops to really showcase the structure and the qualities of each tree. However, we did find this a little bit limiting. Being in an indoor space without a lot of environmental controls and airflow, it did limit the quality of development we could potentially achieve with these trees. So that led to a progression over time and to the new display, which was the North Passage display you all may be familiar with, which is the image in the top left. In this new growing area, it was much more of a gallery style, one straight line of trees in a row, representing the trees with a beautiful, simple backdrop to show the silhouettes. Again, with this, it was a beautiful display. However, in this location, it was a very confined space. So we didn't have really a lot of control over the warm and cool temperatures in that space. So that was a little bit of a limiting factor. So that's kind of a big part of why we wanted to progress and continue to expand our collection and open this new reimagined bonsai courtyard facility. So this transition period has really created a lot of new opportunities for us to share our trees with you, our guests, in new special ways. The photograph on the bottom right is an image taken this past season at the patio of oranges inside the water park terrace. So this is an example of our full azalea exhibit where we featured 10 trees, Satsuki azalea hybrids in full bloom at a single time. And we had 2 full successions of these trees for a total of 20 over a month period. So keep an eye out this season. We hope to continue this and have another one just like this in a similar location. And we, just as a side note too, we are looking for additional locations and other specialty exhibits like this to share with you. And more to be added on that. So today's collection, we have roughly 60 to 70 trees in our collection. They're all in different stages of development. We have roughly 30 finished trees and 40 that are in development. And what I mean by development, some of these are recently collected, some of these are recently donated or purchased. So there's still refinement of branch quality and they're still designed to be achieved on these particular specimens. For example, when I had started here, the olive tree on the bottom left, it was sick for a while. It was potted at a completely different angle. When I started, it was healthy, so it was an opportunity to rewire and reconceptualize the tree itself. The tree in the top center, this tree is about 20 years old. This is a bald cypress. This is started from nursery stock, or actually not nursery stock, from a sapling growing under a large bald cypress at our nursery. So the original nursery manager that collected this gave this to our former curator, and over the course of time, she developed this into this beautiful tree. So this kind of gives you a sense of what you can achieve over that time frame. I wanted to point out the tree on the bottom center. I think this is one of, a lot of feedback on this one. This is one of our guests' favorites. The forest has this ability to create this immersive environment and experience, and you can almost imagine yourself as a tiny person walking through this scenery. Again, the crepe myrtle on the top right, and on the bottom right is our largest Satsuki azalea hybrid, which was imported from Japan roughly 15 years ago. Okay, so as we continue to expand this collection, we're looking to increase the different varieties, the species, the styles, and the sizes of trees that are represented. So over this past summer, I went to a couple different locations and acquired 8 new specimens to kick off our tropical collection. The photograph on the right is a great example of our Bougainvillea glabra. This is a very special tree. I purchased it, or we collected it from Rochester, New York at the International Bonsai Foundation, and it was part of the Joe Noga collection, who's a well-known bonsai photographer. It's very special. It's been on the cover of magazines and also exhibited nationally. In addition, we purchased our other 7 from Weigert's Bonsai Nursery in Fort Myers, Florida. They have a lot of starter material as well as finished specimens. So if you're looking into buying plants, this is one of the areas I would definitely recommend you to check out. They have a great collection of pots as well as trees. So you can check out their website, Weigert's Bonsai Nursery. The image on the left, well, actually all of these images are the other ones we purchased from them. The image on the left is the largest tree we have. This is in the Amono style or Amono size classification. It's roughly 4.5 feet tall. It's a cassia, and it features a beautiful yellow drooping flower. Okay, so not only are we acquiring finished trees, there's always an opportunity to look at other material from our gardens in new ways. So as we began this transition from the old growing spaces like our rose house and our Mediterranean garden, we instead of getting rid of a lot of the material, we repurposed it and reconstituted it to make into bonsai. So the photograph on the left is from our former rose house, and you can see the vine like form of the bougainvillea growing along the back of the image here. And we decided to collect that and keep that. So the image on the right is an example and a picture of the trunk that we salvaged. What's great about this form is because time already did so much of the work for us. It's already established this beautiful size and unique shape and structure to that. So now our goal is to really develop out the branch structure and refine the branch padding. And once it's ready and it gets really healthy and refined, we'll put it into a final display container. So this isn't always a unique opportunity, and this is something we'll touch base on a little bit later, but always just looking at material around you, looking at nursery stock, looking at material that you might be getting rid of in your yard that could potentially become a future bonsai. Okay, so I wanted to express to you a couple of my favorite trees to train, and particularly why. On the images on the left represent the Shimpaku juniper. The one on the left is a much smaller, probably a 2-3-year-old nursery stock material. And what I really like about the juniper is that they have a really compact growth habit, and they're also very flexible. So I have an art background, so I really like manipulating and changing the shape and really designing trees. So because they're pliable, this really gives you a really unique opportunity to shape and really have control over that final form. The image of the Shimpaku on the bottom, now this is a little different circumstance. This is a collected tree, but it also just is an example of the interesting integration between live and dead wood. So you can see the wood that's running up the trunk that is white, that's dead wood feature of the tree. And that can also be created and integrated into a nursery stock material you purchase. And that's often treated with a lime sulfur, and that's what gives it that contrast between the live vein. The photographs on the right, the one on the top right is probably, it's very representative of material you can purchase from Weigert's Bonsai Nursery or Russell's Bonsai. This is a tiger bark ficus, and it gets the name because of the striations on the trunk. I really enjoy these because they're much faster to train and develop, and they're also pretty pest resistant and tolerant to a lot of different conditions in the containerized environment. So like they can go a little bit wet, they can go a little bit dry, and they all do pretty well as a whole. What's great about these, you keep them outside in the growing season, they thrive in full sun, and during the winter, you can keep them inside in a warm environment close to in a southern exposed window. So full sun is ideal. So it's that training continues every part of the season. However, the image on the left, I do want to note the Chinese juniper, they have to go through dormancy. So once you get into the cooler months, these are trees that should not be brought inside, and you should still keep cool so they can conserve their energy and be vigorous for the next growing season. Okay, so next we'll discuss some of the tools. Now, if you would like to get started on bonsai on your own, I wanted to point out a few of the tools and different utensils needed in that process. And this is not all of them, but some of these will really kick you off and get you started in the process. The photograph on the left is a silhouette of different bonsai tools. So on the top left, we have our pruning shears. Here we have like a bending tool for branch bending. Then below we have some of our cutters for cutting thicker branches. We have wire cutters and pliers. You don't necessarily need all of these if you get started right away, but I do recommend getting a nice pair of shears, a pair of wire cutters, and some sort of root rake and chopstick. And that chopstick could be one you have left over from Chinese food. They work pretty effectively in a lot of the root work you may do on a tree. The photograph on the bottom right is the wire we use to train our trees. So they come in lots of different thicknesses and for bending and shaping different size branches. Here's a picture of annealed copper wire. So it's annealed wire, so it's very soft and pliable. And what happens is when you bend it and wire it around the branch, it work hardens the metal, hardening it and hold, which helps hold and solidify that branch in place. And this is typically used on a lot of the conifer species. We also utilize aluminum wire, which is much softer and pliable, that we apply to our deciduous and any trees that have much more tender, fragile bark. The image in the center, top center, this is raffia. So if we are doing heavy branch bending, it's really important to be sensitive, especially if we have an old established tree. Sometimes there could be knots in the tree or dead areas. So we wet the raffia, we wrap it tightly around the branch we want to make a bend. And what that does is when we go to make the bend with the wire, it distributes that pressure and weight evenly across that entire branch and helps keep the bark and the cambium intact. So it minimizes any of the stress and potential breakage on that branch. The photograph on the top right, this is a cut paste. It's almost like a putty, and this comes in a couple different colors. This has a built-in fungicide, which is important for some of the trees we may prune, like our Japanese maples. And it also has a hormone in there that allows for fast callousing. It promotes cellular division. So if you make any cuts that are over 1/4 of an inch, I would recommend applying this product. So the way I do it, I come in with a pair of cutters, and then I'll go in with a razor knife to get a nice, clean, finished edge, and then apply a small amount of putty over top. Okay, so I wanted to touch base on the pots too, because it's not something that's often discussed, but bonsai, the word itself, means contained tree. So it's not just about the tree, it's the relationship and the connection between the pot and the bonsai, it's the tree itself. And what I really enjoy about the pot, especially from my art background, you know, the pot is a way to really enhance and create a beautiful aesthetic and enhance that concept, idea, and feel that that tree represents. Many times we'll use non-glazed containers for our conifers, because if we were to put a bright red glaze, it would overpower like a pine tree. But if we put a bright red glaze with maybe an azalea or something that has really beautiful color, that complements it much better. So these are kind of some things to consider when selecting out pots. We could spend really hours and hours discussing all the different pot options, sizes, styles that can help contribute to that overall aesthetic you want to create. But I did want to just touch on two more items, and that is the photograph in the top center. So not only pots, you can use organic or natural stones for planting your bonsai for a more natural aesthetic. And also on the right, if you wanted to create a root over rock composition, you could potentially create roots that would run down the pot into a container on the bottom and have your tree planted on the side. Or just like that image of the juniper we looked at, it's a much smaller piece of material. You could actually plant a series of these on the stone. Oops, I apologize. So there's a lot of options and a lot of opportunities in displaying your tree. Okay, so soil is very different. The soil we use in bonsai is very different from what we utilize in like the general, like the growing plant industry. It's much more like almost hydroponic in a sense. So we use a much more coarse media, and really it's really great for providing a proper air-water balance inside that soil container. And that's really the key to keeping a tree happy and healthy and growing the way you want it to year after year. A couple examples of the soils we use, the image in the top right, this is Kanuma. This is harvested from Kanuma, Japan. And it's very acidic, around 4.5 pH. And we utilize this for our azalea bonsai and any other acid-loving plants. It's a very soft soil that breaks down pretty readily. So the fine root hairs of azalea are able to break down the soil and actively break it down to grow in there properly. The image on the bottom right is a pretty standard mix we use for most conifers and deciduous in varying quantities. So this is what we call a Boone's mix. This is made up of pumice, akadama, and lava. And this is And we usually, and to give you an example of the size particle, this is roughly 1/8 to 1/4 inch in size, and that the same for the Kanuma above. So we choose the Akadama because it has really great water holding capacity, but it also actively breaks down as the roots expand. So as the fine roots expand, the soil particle divides, and as those roots continue to expand, so does the soil. So it's great soil environment year after year. And we also include the pumice because it doesn't break down. We don't want everything inside that soil mass to become overly compact. So it's important to still allow some soil particles to not break down to allow that air penetration into the soil system. I wanted to point to a couple different soil media, or not soil media, fertilizers you can utilize. I prefer the BioGold. There's a couple areas online you can purchase this from, but I believe this is like a 355 organic fertilizer. And this is widely used for bonsai. I apply this every month or so throughout the growing season, depending on what I'm trying to achieve with the tree. A lot of our refined trees, we don't really need to apply fertilizer too often. We're trying to keep it in that similar state that it's in. However, if we have trees in development, we may apply more often and more quantities at any given time. Dr. Earth Life, this is something I'm still experimenting with, but had good results with so far. This is a 555 organic, and this has a lot of extra microbes and beneficials inside the soil or inside the fertilizer. So if you're starting a new tree or really young piece of material that you really want to boost a little extra energy into, I would recommend a product like this. Okay, so I'd like to shift gears now and jump into some of the training tips and a little bit of a discussion on that. And I think, and during our question answers too, this might be a little more opportunity to jump in and discuss some of the nuances of some of these things we'll talk about here in a moment. So I just want to show you a couple photographs, and all of these photographs, along with a lot more information, is available on our website in our blog section. This is an image. These images are photos of trees or of the azalea bonsai I've recently been developing. This was given to us by Bell Nursery. It was actually a standard at one point, so it had a very straight trunk. And over the course of time, we've shortened the height as well as started to put movement and definition into the branches. So if you'd like to learn more about this process, please check out our blog online. Okay, so when you begin to train a bonsai, I think I'm always asked kind of, well, where do you start? Where do you begin? How do I do this? How do I do that? I think it's important to first understand and think about what do you want to achieve. So I would encourage each of you to look out, come to Longwood Gardens, look outside, look at the large trees in the landscape. Look online, look on Google for bonsai or other trees and see what inspires you. Is it a tall, slender tree? Is it a really massive tree with lots of branching? Is it a tree that has lots of dead wood? Cluing in and tapping into what kind of inspires you will help really inform what type of material you start with, as well as the training process, the fertilizer regime for that particular tree. And one thing to keep in mind too is, like, what is bonsai? We know it's a contained tree. We know it's nature in miniature, but one of our goals as bonsai artists is to create an aged aesthetic. So a tree that looks mature. And how do we do that? There's a couple key things to tap into when thinking about this and training a tree. So the photograph on the left, this is representative of a deciduous tree in winter silhouette. And what gives this tree its character and its sense of age are a few main components. We first identify the base of the tree, that exposed root flare or the nabari. You can really get the sense of it gripping and establishing itself to that soil, that ground line there. Another character is the taper. So going from thick to thin all the way up to the top of the tree. In bonsai, to create finished aesthetics, we're always looking for transitions and movement throughout the main trunk. So you can look from base all the way to the tip. There's beautiful movement and flow throughout. Also, this tree has really highly ramified branching and beautiful distribution throughout the entire tree. And notice also that how on the deciduous model, the branches are growing up and out. This is very similar to what you would find in nature. And though these branches are very similar, they all have slightly different thicknesses, slightly different angles, and that creates a much more natural feel and aesthetic. On the right, this is a conifer. Some of the other features that lend to that aged look is the asymmetry of the tree. So this one would be considered a slant style. So the apex, the top of the tree, is slightly offset from the center of the pot. That gives it a sense of movement. This tree also has a dead tree in it and also has what we would call gin and sherry on the trunk. So this is a deadwood feature. That is a great way to create that sense of age on a bonsai specimen. Okay, so there's a lot of different approaches you can take to starting a bonsai. You can start from nursery stock. Well, you can start from seed and cutting. Now, if you're starting that, one thing to keep in mind is that takes a long time to really develop a tree. So if you want something that's really thick and large, that may not be the way to go for you. But if you want to have a lot of control over what the tree looks like from the very beginning, in their juvenile state, they're much more pliable and easier to shape. So I would encourage you possibly to go that route. So as soon as you get it, you can really start to put that initial shape, really dramatic shape into that. And I would always over dramatize it more than you think you may need, because as the tree thickens and it builds girth, some of those details are lost a little bit. So you're kind of working a little more dramatic to achieve something that's a little less dramatic, but much more in line with that initial aesthetic you were looking for. Some other ways of developing bonsai are from nursery stock. This is one of my favorite ways, especially when I started in bonsai. I would go to Lowe's and Home Depot and purchase $8 to $10 trees. I'd go to the end of the season sales, get them for $5, $6, mugo pines, junipers. And there's little investment, so there's much less fear in that process of pruning and shaping them initially. And yeah, and you can get them for relatively cheap. If you want something that's a little more developed, there's a lot of local growers. There's a lot of bonsai websites that sell pre-bonsai. The images that we're looking at now are what I would consider pre-bonsai. You have that main trunk, you have some branches, but it really doesn't have that character and some of those nuances and that really refined branch structure. So these are like mid-range price trees. You can also go the route of buying finished bonsai or collecting. I really love collected trees because these are trees that are growing in nature and they've been subject to different environmental conditions. And these are the trees that oftentimes have the most nuance and the most character to them. You can also look for collected trees, not only going in the mountains trying to find things. Maybe you have a neighbor that's getting rid of a garden shrub. That's good potential material. One of my volunteers that works with me, he had a neighbor that was getting rid of a garden shrub, and one day it showed up on his doorstep, and he later donated it to Longwood, and now it's on its way to become a bonsai. So I think once you really get the itch and the knack for bonsai, you start looking at material around you in a completely different way. And I know when I drive by my neighbor's house, I'm always looking at like, ooh, that could be a bonsai. And so it just kind of opens up the possibilities around you, and you start to see things around you in a new way. I did want to point out a little bit more about this particular image. The photograph in the top right, this is roughly, I think like a 6-year progression. So you can see the image on the left. The branches are very underdeveloped. They're very straight with lacking character. The second image, there is much more of a branch selection. The structure was much more defined. The next image on the right, the third one from the left, you can see how the secondary and tertiary branching is developing. Also, the branch thickening is starting to develop much nicer as well. And then the final image on the right is it's similar to the other one, but it's a change of the front. So that's one thing to always consider with working on bonsai. Usually, if you have a defined front, sometimes that 180 angle, that opposite angle, has a lot of validity and quality to it as well. So how do we really go about, and how do we really know how to start a bonsai? There are a couple of main things. So we did point to some of the features: creating the bari, creating beautiful branch structure, creating movement. But how do we go if we start with a nursery stock or something that's underdeveloped? How do we begin to look at it and break it down into something that's a little more manageable and easy to create? So if we start with a nursery stock, it's going to look like a shrub. So the first thing we want to go through and do is clean out all of the dead on the interior and start to define that structure. Most of the branches in bonsai, we want to bifurcate. So going 2 branches by splitting off into 2 more and so on. So anytime we have branches, we have 2 branches splitting off, we want to remove any of the crotch growth or any branches splitting off from the outside around there, eliminating it down to 2. So as you begin to do that and work that sort of process throughout the entire tree, it'll start to reveal the structure, the main branch, as well as the primary and secondary branches that will start to define that character. So once we open up that, we also want to start to identify the nabari. So a lot of nursery stock is going to come in a pot, but if the soil line is often very high. So what we'll do is we'll cut down the outer rim of that pot and start to remove a lot of that topsoil to reveal that tapering, that widening and flare of the trunk itself. So once you're able to clue into those aspects of the tree, we can start to look at, okay, what is the most interesting nabari? Where does it have the most movement that leads the eye in? What trunk line looks the most interesting? What angles do you position it at? And keep in mind as well, you don't always have to plant the tree just or conceive it just the way it is in the pot at that plane. You can always re-angle, you can tilt it left, right. So there's a lot of possibilities within that. And once we define that main structure, where that form is, then we can go through that branch selection process. So in traditional Japanese design, usually you have a defining branch on the left or right. You have a left, right branch, a back branch, left, right, back, going up the entire tree. And as you go up the entire tree, the branches are smaller in size. They're thicker at the bottom and thinner as you go up. So these are different techniques and tactics we use in that initial rendition of the tree. So it's hard to really jump in with such limited time to all of the different aspects and nuances to bonsai, but I wanted to point you to a few of my favorite books that kind of got me kicked off a little bit more when I started. One is the Bonsai Survival Manual. It breaks down a lot of the specifics for each tree in a very basic, easy to understand way. It talks about the watering for each tree, the lighting requirements, the soil requirements, season long. And it also discusses any sort of pest management and some of the styling and other tools used in bonsai. I also really enjoy Bonsai Focus. I believe this is, I don't know, I don't know how many, it's a quarterly, yes. I believe it's a quarterly, no, bi-monthly, I apologize, magazine that comes out. And this features a lot of the world-renowned, really well-known artists that are established today, and a lot of various advanced techniques and developmental methods. So they'll show you a tree in its rough state to a final state and goes over all the details of that particular process. Another good book written a little while ago, as I mentioned earlier, John Naka, who was starting bonsai in the West Coast, he wrote Bonsai Techniques 1 and 2. These are really informative and still pretty relevant today. I mean, these are like thick books. This is like the Bible of bonsai, if you will, very comprehensive as a whole. Some of my favorite areas to check out on Facebook is Bonsai America. There's regular postings of things happening all around the world in bonsai, and just exciting to see different takes and different interpretations of bonsai. There's so many, bonsai is becoming so popular around the world, and so many people are interpreting it and seeing it in new ways. So this is a good way to kind of see what else is happening out there. 99-cent bonsai, as well as bonsai auctions on Facebook. There are two areas for purchasing bonsai material. You can get anything from pots to pre-bonsai on there, and they're very affordable trees as well. I do want to point you again to the 4-part vlog series, The Birth of a Bonsai. This is our series on the azalea that we acquired from Bell Nursery that started as a standard. And if you're interested in learning more about bonsai and developing your skill set and knowledge, please join us in the continuing education course. There's going to be more information added soon, and we plan to have it to kick off sometime this summer. So I really thank each of you who joined in today to view the bonsai with this talk on bonsai with me, and really glad to share my experience and my knowledge with you. And I'm looking forward to the questions you have.
Thank you, Kevin. We did receive a number of questions. So the first one is, would you be able to share when the new tropical bonsais will be on display? Specifically, the very large one that you talked about, that it was 4.5 feet. Yes.
So that's a good question. So we're working towards that right now, and we hope sometime this mid-summer, so soon after we feature our all azalea exhibit, to really feature a lot of these at one single point in time. There may be a chance that some of these pop up as individual trees here and there, but as a body of work sometime this summer.
Fantastic. Next question was the bonsai that was the small forest. Could you share a little bit more about the type of tree that is, or type of trees they are?
Absolutely. So the forest that we looked at a bit earlier, that was a loose flowering hornbeam. So hornbeam is a very popular species for bonsai. They develop a beautiful, really interesting branch structure and lend themselves to the bonsai form very well. That particular specimen, I think, had roughly like 10 or 15 trees planted in it. When you create a bonsai form in the forest form, you are always looking for an odd number. That's sort of like the rules of bonsai through China and Japan. But once you get to a certain number, though, you don't really notice too much. So yeah.
Wonderful. You mentioned about harvesting bonsai from the wild. Could you go in a little bit more detail?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of protected areas out there, but there are areas out in our like native environment. There are some parks and out there where you can collect material. So there's a lot of people collecting out in California, even in like Colorado. There's a lot of like junipers, like Rocky Mountain material out there that really grow, really establish interesting character. So the way the collection process goes is a lot of times trees are identified as potential bonsai specimen, and they're usually heeled in. So you dig around the root ball and start to put in some of the bonsai soil around that surface to acclimate them and to that soil environment. And then usually that year after, you can come and collect them out of the wild. And it's a really long process. It takes time. Sometimes they have a really long taproot or a really poor root system. So it takes a few years to really get them healthy. But once you get them kicking, they have the most interesting qualities to them. If you think of things that are growing in the mountains that are subject to harsh conditions or a lot of competitions, these are the trees that have the most unique shapes and the most gestural forms to them. And again, collected material could also be from your backyard. So that's always a great opportunity.
Thank you. We had another question about the bark on the juniper chaparc. Did you do anything to change the bark at all?
So the images we looked at, I'm not sure what the original artist had applied to that particular tree, but for the deadwood, we'll often treat that with lime sulfur, which gives it that white color. But the live vein, we can also bring out more character in that as well. So as the tree is exposed to sun, oftentimes the bark starts to gray out a little bit, but you can actually peel that top layer of bark off and it reveals this beautiful orange color underneath. And that creates a greater contrast between the live and dead. So that's often done for more display purposes and is more of a nuance and just a style preference through different artists. So there's not really a right or wrong which way to go about that.
Great. We have a question about when you know it's time to repot, or is repotting even necessary?
So that's a good question. So when to know to repot? Generally speaking, and that's just kind of species dependent, usually every 2 to 5 years. It also depends on what stage in development the tree's at. But I always like to pot proactively, but once you get to a certain point where you start to see maybe you're not getting quite as much vigor in the tree, and especially if you're seeing any sort of decline in health, that's a good indicator that it's time to change the pot. Our deciduous are usually a little more vigorous in root growth, so maybe 2 years, or conifers could go 5, 6. If it's established tree, we might go, I've seen them like 10, 15 years even. And I've heard stories too, in Japan, they've been in the pots 20, 30 years, and then when they go to repot, it's like a solid brick of soil. So I wouldn't recommend going that long, but it's important to remember too, how we're able to keep this miniature aesthetic of bonsai too. It's growing it in this contained, confined environment. So keeping it in that container encourages those small internodes and compact growth, but also replenishing the soil periodically keeps it growing happy and healthy in that environment.
Thank you. We have another question. Would you be able to recommend a simple resource for beginners, for a home grower? They received a bonsai as a gift and they want to make sure they take great care of it.
Absolutely. So the Bonsai Survival Manual, the book we had listed in the PowerPoint, that's a great resource for you. And there's an abundant amount of resources through YouTube as well, that if you have a particular tree, like a juniper or a deciduous, there's a lot of material on that as well. I enjoy Ryan Neal, Bonsai Mirai. He has a lot of great content, free content, as well as paid for content on his personal website. And he's very well-known artist and very, very knowledgeable in that regard. Yeah.
Wonderful. We have another question about root pruning, that they've read about only 1/3 of the roots should be pruned, and some of the trees are showing very shallow. Some of the pots or the bonsai you showed were in very shallow pots. Could you talk a little bit about trimming roots and how much?
Yeah, again, this is something that's pretty species dependent. Generally speaking, with our conifers, we're going to remove 1/3 of the root ball. We don't want to go much more beyond that because they really rely a lot on that microbial activity, that mycorrhizal connection with the fungus inside the soil container. So if we remove a lot of the root ball and remove too much of the soil, we remove a lot of that connectivity inside the soil. So we're much more tender on those species. However, a deciduous and a lot of our tropicals, we could essentially bare root and remove a much greater amount of the soil. And there are times too where you might have really mucky soil. Some of it might really be good quality soil. So you have to go through series by series. Maybe one year you clean up one part of underneath the soil where it's really mucky, and then you save another part for the next time you repot. So you're not eliminating too much at any given time. So it's a slow process, but over time, if you have that poor soil condition, that's one way to kind of reinvigorate the tree over the course of time.
Wonderful. We have a question about watering and your schedule. And specifically, they also have a juniper nana. And if you can talk a little bit about watering that particular plant.
Okay. Yeah, so watering, I don't really go by a schedule. As a whole, we water less in the winter, much more in the summer. So it could be 1 to 3 times a day, depending on the species. However, the way I like to go about the watering process is really just knowing what the species prefers. So deciduous might be a little more wet, our conifers might go a little more dry. So I feel in the soil every day I'm out in the garden. I'll put my hand into the soil, feel down as far as I can, and really get a sense of what that's like. And that gives me an indicator of whether I'm going to water now or it can hold off until later in the day. And again, during the winter, we're going to water much less. For a juniper in particular, they're pretty drought tolerant. So they could go with much less water, but they also handle water pretty well too. So I like to find just that medium continual moisture level is pretty good for those.
Wonderful. So Judith has Japanese maple seedlings in her yard. Do you recommend them becoming bonsai?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm all for that. I do the same thing myself. I've collected about 20 under a tree at my father's house that have established really nicely now. I've had them in pots for a couple of years, and I'm going to turn them into a forest composition. So that it's great material, great stock to start with, whether you're creating a single bonsai, forest planting, or what have you. And especially as saplings, as I mentioned earlier, you have that opportunity to really put some interesting shape and movement into those trees.
Thank you. You mentioned a bonsai store or based on Fort Myers. Could you share the name of that establishment again?
Yes, it's Weigert's Bonsai. Yeah, they're in Fort Myers. If you're ever in the area, check it out. It's a wonderful space, but they have a wonderful website as well to purchase material.
We had another question about the roots growing over the rock look. And could you share a little bit how that was developed and maybe the years that it takes to actually establish that kind of look?
Sure, yeah. So initially, when you're establishing a root over rock, you want to initially encourage that elongation of the root system. So one way you can go about that is growing them instead of like a wide container, you want to grow them in a long cylindrical container. And what that, and also in like a little more of a coarse media. So that allows a lot of interesting movements and shapes in that root system and allows them to grow much longer. So once you get it to that point, then you're able to get it, then you have something to work with. So then you can start to form it around that stone and find all the unique crevices and areas that interact with the stone itself and plant it on. So yeah, it's a process that takes many years to achieve. And even after we put the roots over the stone, we cover it with sphagnum and soil to protect the soft, tender roots. And over the course of time, we'll slowly lower the soil line, which will thicken and harden off those roots until it's able to live on its own with the roots that are growing in the soil container at the very bottom.
So many years of patience.
Many years, absolutely.
We also received a question about when is it too late to start the bonsai process? Specifically, they have a mini Christmas tree about 1 foot high. Is it too late to maybe start training this as a bonsai sample?
No, not at all. I think each piece of material has an opportunity to be transformed into a really special piece of material. But each of them sort of has a built-in time frame with that. So amount of extra work that might go into it. So I guess it kind of just depends on that initial investment you would like to put into it. But yeah, I would encourage you, if you have a piece of material around, to just dive into it. Now wouldn't really be the time of year to maybe start doing any root work or shaping, but your next window of time is going to be early spring, when you can start to shape it and also look into doing repotting. But I wouldn't do both at once. So either start developing that root system, or do the styling. And that's based off the fact it's growing healthy and it's doing well. Yep.
Could you share a little bit more about overwintering deciduous trees?
Yeah, so deciduous trees, They should be kept cold. So in our current facilities, we keep them in temperatures that reach about 35. So we want to maintain a temperature similar to that through an extended period of time. Now, they don't have as much of a light requirement as some of the conifers that are all trees are continuing to metabolize, but they're not doing that on as high of a level as the trees that are still maintaining its foliar mass. So oftentimes these could be put in garages, depending on the space you have. If you can still keep it in light, wonderful, but you could keep these in a cool garage. I keep mine under my wood deck, but they don't need that same lighting requirements that some of the others may. But look, keeping them cold is key for that process.
Wonderful. You mentioned a little bit about watering. Do you prefer to mist or spray the soil, or actually pour water on the soil?
Yeah, so I usually, well, it depends, but I have a bonsai, so I use a regular garden hose. I have a special bonsai wand that gives a nice spray distribution along the top of the soil. But typically when I water, I'm going to saturate it pretty well. And it depends what the day is going to look like too. If it's going to be a 95-degree day, I'm going to super saturate that soil to really keep that moisture level up throughout the day. But there are occasions too where I do top it off with a little bit of water, but I try and change it up, because if you continually top off, what can happen is you could potentially get some salt buildup inside the soil. So periodically flushing out that system is important as well.
We are going to finish with our last question. And this is in regard to tiger bark ficus that you mentioned a little bit earlier, and about the best lighting for this particular plant. Currently, it's in east and north facing windows, but do you feel that there is another direction that is best for that particular tree?
Absolutely. For our area here, a south facing window is best. You're going to get the maximum amount of sun exposure during the day. And even that being said, whether you can keep it in a south facing or it's another window, if you can provide it with supplemental lighting, that's a great way to encourage the vigor of the tree. What I find is if they grow in lower light environments, they tend to grow a little more long and leggy, and you don't get that robust growth out of them. So if you can during the summer, keep them outside, and in the winter would be a south facing window.
Well, that was our last question. Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your love of horticulture with our members. This recorded presentation and the plant guide of all of the details that Kevin has shared will be emailed to all of the attendees. I would also like to thank you, our members. Your support not only preserves our rich legacy, but also helps Longwood Gardens to continue to inspire many generations to come. So thank you from all of us at Longwood. Have a great day.
Thank you.